He said, the conflict of any member of our order. And as he says this, he kind of uses the soft part of his paw to brush off the brilliant platinum insignia of the Plains Militant that clasps his cloak on. The conflict of any number of our order is knowing how to balance that which is good and virtuous, which wars must be fought, with our sworn duty to protect the mountain. And many of us find that conflict to be very troublesome, a Khazriel more so than most. He asks if you know a Khazriel's story. Did a Khazriel tell you that he was banished from the order?
We've been trying to find it out, but no one will tell us. No one will talk to us about it.
He said, and he kind of chuckles to himself, and he says, you asked Korunu.
Kelian looks up.
Korunu, yeah. We've met Korunu.
He says, Korunu is a good friend, but he is not a good source of information. Korunu, perhaps rightly, considers himself to be above most people, including most of the pilgrims and visitors that come to the holdfasts.
That rubs me the wrong way, to be quite honest.
He says he also considers himself to be above any fallen archons, of which a Khazriel was one. A Khazriel has done evil things that have besmeared his good virtue. Not only was he cast out of the order, but he was cast from the mountain as well.
Well,
Kelian says, did his gods abandon him?
I forget what class a Khazriel is. If he has a class.
I thought he was a paladin.
He's probably just a Archon, mechanically.
Yeah, he doesn't have any class levels. So he's told that never knew a Khazriel to be a worshipful man. That many Archons are not, because Archons are not mortal creatures. They are the exemplars from Mount Celestia. And that some of them follow the paths of gods, but a Khazriel, in fact, did not. He says a Khazriel felt a great deal of shame at what he had become and what continued to drive him. It doesn't surprise me that he never told any of you the story.
We didn't know him for that long.
No.
He says that he and a Khazriel, very shortly after being promoted to Hound Archons, were tasked to partake in a sortie in the Blood War. There was a contingent of Tenari that were holding some sort of secret meeting on the Outlands. And this information came to the Plains Militant, and much discussion was had about whether this meeting was a danger to the mountain or not. And it was decided that they would send a small number of Archons to...
For reconnaissance?
They would rendezvous with a contingent of Beatisu, who they had worked with in the past. Not with the intention of bringing violence to these Tenari, but yeah, just reconnaissance. Find out why they were pushing into the Outlands. What they found was that these Tenari were dealing with elementals. They were dealing with slavers from the City of Brass. The Beatisu decided when they got there, who had 1/10 the Tenari's numbers, decided when they got there that the Tenari buying a massive slave force was unacceptable, and they decided to press the attack. So Khazriel and Amuleth had to make a choice, whether to stand with them and fight, or whether to return and tell what they had learned. The other Hound Archons with them decided to return. The Khazriel Amuleth stayed and fought. And Khazriel, during the fight, which began going really badly for the Tanari turned on the elementals and began slaughtering these slaves that they were purchasing en masse. Their reasoning being, if we slaughter this slave force, the Beatisu have no more cause to press this attack, and we can escape from them. Which is exactly what happened. But the horror of what the Tanari did to these slaves was unacceptable. Akazriel could not abide it. So after this big clusterfuck went down, Amulus returned to the mountain and implored Akazriel to come with him. But Akazriel didn't. Akazriel learned the name Jandar and decided to follow him to the city of Brass. And at that point, Akazriel had abandoned his duties in the Plains Militant.
The color drains out Ciclon's face when the city of Brass is mentioned.
He says the next thing that happened, nobody saw Akazriel for years after that, until he started appearing at some of the monasteries on the first and second layers of Mount Celestia, and he was carrying a magical weapon that he'd come in possession of. A weapon that was wielded by one of the grand paladins of ancient lore in the Order. And the paladin was a dwarf, and his weapon was a giant hammer that dealt killing blows to earth elementals. That this hammer was said to be able to level mountains, break through any wall. And Akazriel used this weapon to recruit low-level members of the Order to his cause, saying, look what I have been granted in service of the mountain. Follow me. Liberate these slaves. And Ciclon, your escape from those slave pits coincides with this particular attack. There was a moment in the city of Brass where, in great chaos, you were able to slip through a portal. And you suddenly realize that you have Akazriel to thank for this. However, it came to be learned that Akazriel had killed the caretaker of this hammer, realizing that he needed it in order to see his goal through, that without it, nobody would flock to his banner. And he rationalized this act of evil, killing the dwarven caretaker of this hammer and taking it, and then using the false pretense to amass a small force, would be able to do a much greater good. But the mountain could not abide that, and after that, Akazriel was unable to climb higher than the first level. Not only did Akazriel lose that hammer during the attack, but every single warrior he brought with him died or was enslaved. The attack was a massive failure. He was badly wounded by one of the Dao slavers, and the last time Amuleth saw him, he had come back to the mountain beseeching aid. And Amuleth told him rather than seeking aid, he should seek forgiveness. After that, Akazriel decided to go back to Sigil. That's the last anybody here has seen of him.
Well, that would explain why Koranu treats his name like mud.
Well, Koranu began treating his name like mud the minute he decided to not come back from that sortie. In that moment, this is nothing that Koranu has ever spoken of openly, but knowing what Koranu is like, that's the moment Koranu lost any faith in Akazriel. It just got worse and worse from there.
Well, his last request was that we come seek you out and request your aid.
Riot will tell Annulith that the slavers are still operating. They're still out there. They've begun infiltrating Sigil. We put a stop to them a little while ago. Gave them a little setback, but they'll be back.
Yeah.
And he says he wishes you all the best in your endeavors, that he can provide very little in the way of martial aid. And this comes back around to the great conflict that racks every high-ranking member of the Order, their duty to protect the mountain versus taking war to the evils of the multiverse, a conflict between law and good.
Is there anything you can tell us then about how they operate? You've dealt with them more than we have.
He says he hasn't dealt with him since the sortie. All he knows is what little he got from Akazriel during their last meeting. He says that Akazriel had learned of a magical item of great power, but he didn't know its shape or its form that Xandar was seeking.
Ciclon takes a deep breath and then looks to Riot. I have reason to believe that item is now in Bahamut's possession.
And that catches him off guard. And he asks how that came to be.
It's a great story. I'll let Riot tell it.
It is a good story.
And
Riot tells the story.
What details does Riot leave out, if any?
Let's see.
Because the story would go something like this. You guys found a hideout operated by the slavers in Sigil. Mm-hmm. In that hideout, you found incriminating evidence of several factal high-ups, or faction high-ups.
So that part, she's already told him.
Okay. There were 3 faction members in particular that you implicated. I'm sorry, 4. Mm-hmm. In the Fated, the Harmonium, the Mercy Killers, and the Governors. 2 of them are imprisoned. 1 of them you killed.
And one of them is
one of them escaped. Do you tell him all of that?
Yeah.
Do you tell him which one escaped?
Yes.
Okay, at that point, he holds up his hand and says, as it happens then, I can help you. He says, we should invite Whitespear to this conversation.
Whitespear?
She didn't seem too pleased to see us.
He says that Koranu is not the only person in the Holdfast that believes he is above all others.
She was as polite as she was able to be. She told me.
Well, then,
he says...
Your meeting with her went better than mine, didn't it?
But if it's information about the slaver ring that you're looking for, and you know of a mercy killer criminal...
That was Venvrian Nulls.
Yeah, Venvrian Nulls. A name that he doesn't know, because he does not spend a great deal of time in Sigil. But he says, doubtless, Whitespear would hear that with great interest. And so he says, before you continue with the story, we should probably invite Whitespear to the conversation.
Yeah, I'll go fetch her.
That's what you think. Okay.
And Ciclon, you find her in the temple, and what is it that you tell her?
I'll say, good evening, Miss Whitespear. Or good afternoon, Miss Whitespear. Because
and she corrects you, Justicar Whitespear.
Justicar Whitespear, my apologies.
Are you still Justicar? Didn't you leave?
You're not there.
Oh.
My companions and I have information that... What is his name? The Hound Archon fellow.
Oh, Anuleth?
Amuleth, yeah, Anuleth has. We have information that is of mutual interest to both Anuleth and yourself regarding a rogue member of the Mercy Killers.
And she says, she kind of scoffs, and she says that there are many rogue Mercy Killers, least of all the Factal. So you tell her, you drop the name.
I just dropped the name.
And you see her bristle a bit. And she says, what does the liaison of the Order of Plains Militant, what interest does he have in Venvrian Nulls?
Well, we were just having a discussion on that, and he said we should put that on hold until you joined us. That way we could all put our heads together.
And she says, is this where the purpose of you and your companions is finally made clear to me?
Well, I think I've heard that my companions have tried to meet with you, and I've only been brushed off. But I'm guessing so. Yeah. So, shall we? We're working. We're meeting together in the cafeteria right now.
She denies brushing off any of your companions. In fact, in her opinion, they were the ones who treated her with great rudeness and disrespect.
I'll apologize for them.
She graciously accepts the apology, and she goes ahead and continues her prayer. So you're standing and waiting on her for 5 or 10 minutes, and eventually she stands up and motions for you to lead. And
All right, I'll lead the way.
as a reminder, the whole time here, she's been dressed in her immaculate Mercy Killer armor. She has not cast it aside. So you all waiting back in the commons. Eventually, El Ciclon brings Ione Whitespear to the table. And she goes through some cordial greetings to Amuleth. She does not act any friendlier towards Mahogany or Riot.
Glad you could join us.
What about Kelian?
What about Kelian?
Yeah.
Has Kelian had any personal interaction with her? I don't think he has yet.
No, but he
She
did
does-
sort of get smitten in the middle of
Yeah,
everything.
that's a very
That-
public thanking.
That's true, but Ione's not a member of the Order, and she's not
Right.
one of Coronu's underlings. Kelian, you don't get the sense that Ione thinks much of you at all. You don't get the sense that she gives you any regard.
She's also a mercy killer, and he's never been convicted of anything.
She definitely knows the allegations that Coronu's laid at you, and you would infer that she knows enough about Coronu that he speaks truthfully. So,
What does he know?
Amuleth quickly catches up Ione and all the details that you've given so far. And the idea that this slavery ring is pushing into Sigil, you see, is very foreign to her. As a Justicar, she doesn't do a lot of work in Sigil. She's not in Sigil very often. But so you reach the point of Venvri and Nulls, and then Amuleth gives Riot leave to continue.
Right. So we have documents implicating Nulls as well as 3 other faction factals in the slavery ring. They were there to ensure that Gendar's operations were passed under the nose of the law.
They were there to grease the wheels, so to speak.
Right. One was in the Governors, one was in the Harmonium, and of course one was in the Mercy Killers.
Do you reveal that you know that the Harmonium member was actually an anarchist?
No.
Okay,
That's the one part of the story that she leaves out.
gotcha. And when Whitespear hears of that, it doesn't surprise her in the slightest. She says there is rot and corruption at the highest levels of every faction, and that it causes her great shame that the lawful backbone of Sigil seems to be where that rot has taken hold the strongest. So the next part of the story would be Treskelia's box. What do you tell her about the box?
We know every faction wanted it. We don't know what was inside it, but we know that it's gone now. We know of no way to recover it.
And as you reach this part of the story, you see this is the part Amuleth, he kind of leans forward and puts his hands together. This is the part he's been waiting to hear. How did the box end up in Bahamut's hoard?
So what we had wanted was a way to reach here, right? And so we went to the Temple of Bahamut in Sigil, hoping that donating it would give us, would loosen their tongues a bit. It spectacularly did not. So we left with nothing. We left with no information and no box. And
That's
now
not quite true. You left with nothing.
Oh, was there more after I left? Well, probably didn't matter. Anyway.
And finally, do you tell Amuleth that Akazriel tasked you with delivering him the box?
That like Cosriel did?
Yes.
Yeah. That was
Oh,
the
yes.
deal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
That's
So,
why El Ciclon was so pissed.
right. We originally came to give it to you.
Well, we originally planned to come.
Right.
Give it to you.
We don't have it
I just
now.
assumed all the groups on Mount Celestia talked to each other. It seemed like we were done.
Yeah, we don't have it now, but we still need your help.
And Amuleth says, and so the weaknesses of chaos reveal themselves. Though you all had the best of intentions, you were not able You were not able to bring a plan to fruition. Your short-term gain clouded your long-term plan.
I don't think we ever had a plan.
I'm sure whatever we were doing was right at the time.
And I don't think we had a gain either.
When Mahogany says, I don't think we ever had a plan, Amuleth, he looks more amused than anything. INA bristles
Elciclone throws up his hand. Elciclone throws up his hands in annoyance and says, "Wow, really? Could have fooled me."
He says...
Wait, you thought there was a plan?
Amuleth says that there's good and bad news. He says the good news is that he is inclined to help because of his relationship with Akazriel. He feels that he owes his old friend, though he was fallen and lapsed into darkness, that his last days were spent in a zealous pursuit of a goal that was very outside of his nature. He says that because that goal was pursued with the goodness in Akazriel's heart, the desire to do good, he is inclined to help Akazriel see this through. I believe that the mountain has sent you all to me, so that this might be done. You are the agents that Akazriel's plan will work through. Though he was deemed insufficient and cast down from the mountain, so all of you risen up. An item of such preciousness that enters Bahamut's hoard is not lost forever. But now we come to the bad news.
What's the bad news?
The bad news is that Bahamut is not a particularly well-revered power within the Order. There are very few who follow his path. And the only man I know who might be inclined to aid you in the retrieval of that box is House Warden Koranu.
Well, we had a very nice breakfast with him the other day.
Elciclone takes a deep breath, and actually he does say, "Oh boy," as he's finishing that sentence.
He seemed alright. I mean, he didn't kill Kelian.
Kelian gets up and walks out.
So let me get this straight. The guy who can help us has wants nothing to do with Kazriel or his mission and has already disowned him, and B wants nothing to do with us or our party, or especially Kelian.
And Amuleth, he gives Riot this look as though she's a child that has learned an important lesson. And he says, and now you learn that no path on Mount Celestia is walked easily.
What if we left Mount Celestia and then just sent him a message?
Mahogany, this is the kind of thing that you ask people in person.
He asks how any of you would begin to sway Koranu's disposition. Where would you start?
Well, he's already...
Well, the only way we're going to get this to work is if he thinks it's his duty to do it. So, what does he consider his duty?
Protect the mountain.
Kelian, real quick.
I could tell you that much.
Yeah.
Are you wearing colors at the moment?
You mean faction colors?
Yes.
Yeah, he probably would be.
Okay. A minute or two after you all start discussing this Koranu question, which we'll get back to right in a moment, Ione very politely stands and excuses herself from the table and follows out after Kelian. So you all are starting to discuss what Koranu's duty is in protection of the mountain.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so how does doing this protect the mountain?
If he helps us, how about this? We are discharging the duty. So from what you told us, Anula, there's this whole faction that Akazriel swayed away from the mountain. Our pitch to Koranu is we shoulder this burden in return for which no members of the Order ever need trouble themselves with it again.
Amuleth nods and says that would be a good start.
You also did say that several of Akazriel's number were captured.
And Amuleth nods. He says, all we know for certain is that Akazriel is the only one that returned, and at grievous injury, and having lost the hammer that he committed such grievous sins to attain. It's very possible that a number of those holy warriors were taken and put into Gendar's pits.
So there's a pot sweetener.
Bring them back.
Yeah, we bring them back. We stop it from being the Or's problem, and maybe we can get the hammer and return it to Koranu.
I don't know. I'm leery of positioning this in any way as a quid pro quo sort of situation. I don't think he's much of a traitor.
Like, wait, a traitor?
Trader.
Okay, I get you. Gotcha.
I agree with you, but on the other hand, how do we appeal to his sense of righteousness? I mean, look at us.
Yeah.
Do we even know what became of that hammer? I don't remember him wielding it.
Yeah, he lost it sometime during that fight. It was what in the Outlands.
No, this would have been in the City of Brass.
Oh, in the City of Brass itself.
No, he came back to Mount Celestia, killed the dwarf who was in possession of this hammer, took it from his house, and then used that to rally other warriors to his cause. That's the act of great evil that got him banished from the upper levels of the mountain. That was the act that caused him to become a fallen archon. But he led those warriors under false pretense to the City of Brass in an attempt to smash Gendar's operation from there.
So chances are Jandar is the one who's got that hammer now.
But I take your point, Mahogany, that we can't approach this as a, hey, we'll do this for you, and then he says no, and then says, and then we'll do this other stuff for you too. We've got to put together one coherent pitch for him. It says, this is what we're offering you.
It needs to be in such a way that him doing this thing for us is him protecting the mountain. It can't be that he's doing this for us. It has to be that this is the right thing for him to do.
Well, and Amuleth, when Mahogany makes that point, Amuleth nods, and he gives you that same look as though you're a young child coming into this realization. Like you've just memorized your times tables.
So we say it makes the mountain safer by returning its protectors to it. Right?
Sure. And also, have they been enslaving people from the mountain? If they've been attacking the mountain itself.
Amuleth says that it would be impossible to say for certain, but imagine you were Jandar. Imagine you had the pick of the multiverse with which to take your slaves from. He said, would you go to the most dangerous place for you, or would you go to the easiest place where the most profit could be had?
Well, we already know he's going to Sigil, so the answer is that's clear.
Yeah, I'd stay in the slags.
He says it's very unlikely that Jandar would be able to ply his trade on the mountain.
Alright, so we forget that part of it.
Yeah, so we tell him that if our quest is successful, then he gets his people back. The order goes back to its fullest strength.
And as much as he's disowned this person, I'm willing to bet he still takes some responsibility for him. So I'm saying we also get the hammer and bring it back to the dwarves, which a member of his order took it from.
Okay, but
that way his order is redeemed too.
But that goes back to your question. How does getting the hammer back protect the mountain? It's a good thought, but I just want to bring it back to our central theme here.
True.
I mean, it can't be used against them in the Blood War. I imagine the City of Brass would sell it to some sort of hideous demon.
Restores people's faith in the order. That can only help protect the mountain.
Serenity, roll a straight wisdom check.
13, I believe.
13? You make the point that it's possible that Jandar would sell this magic weapon in the Blood War. And as you say it, you catch yourself and you realize that's very unlikely. Being an Earth Genasi yourself, if you came into possession of a weapon that was used against your kind, you would want to keep it out of anybody's hands. It's more likely that Jandar kept this as a trophy. First, because it was a prize taken from an enemy force, and second, because this is something that could deal grievous injury to him and his. Best that it's locked up in his house. Kind of like how Dracula keeps the boomerangs and the candles in his castle.
Makes sense.
Well,
Yeah.
is it an artifact, or is it something he could conceivably destroy?
But why does? Oh,
It's a magical weapon. It's a magical hammer. It's probably not an artifact, though.
but why? Does
So what's the
Dracula keep a
specific-
boomerang right outside his door? Is the question.
What's the specific thing we're asking him to do for us?
We need his help in
Besieging
treating
Bahamut.
Bahamut to give us our box back.
And at this, Amuleth says that Bahamut, of the powers, especially the powers on the mountain, is the greediest and the most vain. It's very rare that Bahamut lends treasure from his hoard, but in great times of need, his proxies have been known to be granted such items.
Can I ask you something?
He nods.
This is what I don't get about Bahamut. Right? Lord of Mount Celestia. Like one of the highest powers of the whole plane.
And Amuleth stops you there and says,
Mhm.
on the contrary, Bahamut is one of the lesser powers of Mount Celestia.
Oh yeah?
He nods. He
Well-
says, this is a place where the kings of pantheons reside, the dwarves, the halflings.
That aside, how does being vain and greedy square with being lawful and good?
He says that's a question you would have to ask to a dragon. Not knowing a dragon's nature, he doesn't understand it either.
Obviously, the dragons have laws that make all the stuff theirs.
He says,
So
contrast...
do we need the box, or do we need what's in the box?
We need what's in the box.
So why does the box need to leave Bahamut's custody at all?
Well, because I guess because we can't word our request more specifically than that.
We can't even open it, can we?
And this is where Amuleth chimes in and says that he has ways to open magical boxes. Which is
I'm sure
why
that if we
Akazriel wanted you to
That's
send
why
it to him in the first
Akazriel,
place.
yeah. That's why Akazriel wanted it here, yeah.
Well, shall we go talk to Coroner? Have we got our pitch together?
Amuleth says, for what it's worth, though I will speak no lie and foot no deception, I will put my word in where it's useful with Koranu.
All right. Thank you.
So he's got your back as long as you don't try to deceive the Order in some way or misrepresent your quest.
Gotcha.
Kelian, you stomped off in a huff like a 15-year-old. Where did you go?
Just outside.
Outside
to
in
let
the
out-
yard?
To let out a blood-curdling shout of frustration.
And you get looks from the men on the walls and the bridges above you. And after a few moments, Ian, a white spear, joins you outside, bids you good morning, or good afternoon.
Kelian nods. A little out of breath.
And she motions to your faded colors that you're wearing. She says, there are factions in Sigil that consists of murderers, anarchists, thieves, illusionists, but I have locked up more of your number than any other.
I believe that.
She says that it seems the conversation she was invited to turned immediately away from the part of it that she was interested in. The part she's interested in is learning more about these 4 high-ups that were implicated. So she asks you, being the only member of any of those factions sitting at the table, what you know about the Fated who is implicated.
Kelian will tell her. He'll leave out the part where he was hired by his boss. I gotta go through my notes now.
His name was Torier, if that helps.
Thank you, Torier. Explains about his boss Torier, how he was involved, and how Kelian will say that he was framed for the murder of the one investigating it. But other than that, he explains everything.
Okay. And so you explained that Torier is one of the 2 members that was imprisoned.
Yeah.
Do you tell her that Darkwood is the one that ordered that imprisonment? Because, just to remind you of what happened, because this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
What happened was, you were there when Darkwood ordered Torier to be taken directly to the Mercy Killers, not to the Harmonium, not to the Governors. He wanted him in a cell, bypassing due process altogether. He was disgusted at the idea of this slavery ring, and wanted to see that Torier was punished as swiftly as possible.
Yeah, because that looks bad on Darkwood.
Okay.
So Kelian will totally mention that.
So you tell INA that there is a man who, by all evidence, is guilty, but who has not had a trial, currently imprisoned by the Mercy Killers.
Yeah.
And this seems to disturb her more than anything else that was discussed. And she swallows this great lump in her throat. And for the first time, you see anger in her expression. Now, when you explain Darkwood's involvement, I mean, do you give indication that you can't stand Darkwood? Is that coming up clearly?
That's, he gives it in the sense, normally it would be anger, bitter resentment, but
Right.
it would come off now knowing that the last and only trump card he has over Darkwood, which would be the box. Now that that's gone, Kelian figures that he's basically done for.
So you tell
a
her
little
that,
more like trepidation and nervousness.
but you mentioned to her that Darkwood was one of the people who were looking for this box.
Yeah.
And she raises an eyebrow at that. She says, "Do you have any evidence that the reason Darkwood chose to implicate your superior was to hide his own involvement?"
It crossed my mind, but
But do
I
you
don't-
have evidence?
I
Can you
don't.
prove it?
I don't.
And INA is much older than you. She's twice your age at least. I mean, she's, if she was any older, she'd be on Golden Girls. Which was a great show, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
As she sighs in a way that Kelian really sympathizes with. And she says, "Tell me, were our factions ever great? Were they ever led by just, merciful people? Was there ever greatness in them, or were we blinded?"
You are blinded. No, sorry.
Kelian crosses his arms, looks downward.
Join the cipher.
Tear it all down.
You mean the faction that's about to get mazed? Yeah, that's a good idea.
Mace together, praise together.
He's been wanting to say that for 2 hours. He's been sitting on it. So what's Kelian's response, if any?
I'm not looking for honesty. I'm not looking for justness. Hell, I'm not even looking for honestness.
And she says that honesty and honestness are the same thing, but
Yeah,
continue.
thanks. Thank you.
Also, honestness might not be a word. Go ahead.
Womp womp.
Sorry.
I'm improvising here. It's,
Got you. So what is it you are looking for, she asks.
Something to belong to and something to say I'm a part of that. And not be worried. And having to look over my shoulder and having doubts the entire time.
That doesn't seem to resonate with her at all. So this is a problem she's never had.
Sure.
She asks you... At first she confesses to you that having been away from Sigil for so long on missions, having been gone the crucial time when Factal Malin died and the reprehensible Nylesia was raised to take his position, she was gone for that. She was gone when several of Malin's closest advisors went missing under suspicious conditions. She blames herself, she says, for not being there when things happened to her faction that she believes contributed to its downfall. And she confesses that she doesn't know if there's one person in the Mercy Killers left that wants to see it return to greatness, or if they've all decided to wallow in Nylesia's muck.
Well, I mean, in that regard, we are similar because I don't know what Rowan Darkwood is up to, other than
And at that,
him wanting power for the sake of power, and thus wanting more power.
Can I ask you something out of character here?
sure.
Is Kelian going to mention? Does Kelian even know that Darkwood and Nylesia are a thing?
Yeah, he does.
Okay,
And that's
so you're gonna
what-
tell her that.
That's what she brings up. When you start to mention Darkwood, she interrupts and says, I don't know what Darkwood has to do with it. We're discussing the Mercy Killers.
Oh, well, Kelian then explains to him that Darkwood is porking Nylesia.
Does he use that word?
Yeah.
That sounds like Kelian, to be fair.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Wow.
She's kind of taken aback for a moment. Like, you've totally caught her off guard. She doesn't, like, for the first time in the conversation, she doesn't, like, know what to say about it. And the words she settles on are that an alliance between the Mercy Killers and the Fated can only be an alliance for personal gain. There's no political or philosophical reason for these two factions to be strongly on the same side of an issue. Why would the Fated, a faction that is known for rampant corruption, who in fact feed on rampant corruption, a faction of thieves primarily above all things, why on earth would they support a proclamation that declares criminals being erased without due justice? Why would a thief support that?
Well, you just explained why a thief would support that. In terms of if our faction is aware and that they're protected, that they can do anything and then get away with anything, then how could they not support that?
And she doesn't follow your logic. And she apologizes and says that perhaps what you're saying is true, but it is not in my nature to think like a thief.
Wow.
This must be a
How
pretty
does she
poor
catch a lot of
Justicar.
thieves? You have to think like a thief to catch a thief.
She asks what you would see happen to the Mercy Killers. In your opinion, what would be the best outcome for her faction and Sigil?
I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't given it a whole lot of thought because I'm looking out for my own faction. And I fear that Darkwood wants for the sake of wanting. He just wants power for the sake of power, and it's going to destroy at least my faction. It will probably bring down your faction as well, and who knows what else.
So, in the party, it's really only Riot's faction that's doing okay. She nods and says, if what you're saying is true, and she says that with a hint of skepticism that what you're saying is true at all. But she says, if what you're saying is true, it does seem as though our two factions are intertwined. She says, I've been sitting idle here long enough. I would have your assistance.
And I get the inclination that while there may be skepticism, you also feel that you believe what I am saying.
You came to me, lady.
So, yeah.
Yeah, she asks for assistance. She says,
Yeah.
I would ask something of you.
Kelian agrees. Shakes her hand.
She says, there's a man, a mercy killer, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it's possible he doesn't exist. But if he exists, he is the man who can restore our faction to greatness. I need to know if there's anybody in my faction in Sigil, you having me at a disadvantage when it comes to the interconnections of the factions and the politics therein. Having been on the streets of Sigil yourself recently, can you think of anyone in the faction who you would trust with very sensitive information?
Yeah. There's oh, and I forget her name. What's her name?
Does anybody remember?
Dolphender.
Dolphender. Yeah. Well, it's not so much if I would trust her; it's if she would trust me.
To which she kind of eyeballs your faded insignia, but says nothing.
It's a long story.
She says there is a very old bylaw in our faction that has not been invoked in many years, not since Factal Malin's time, certainly. That a Justicar can, through extreme circumstances, identify and take on new quarry in the field, rather than receiving those orders from her superiors. I'm going to invoke this bylaw. I need you to be the messenger. It's a formality. You'll hand a scroll over to this person in the faction that perhaps doesn't trust you. This will give me an honorable cause to seek out Venvrian Gnolls. But that is a pretense. What your contact will actually be doing for me is to find out if the Watcher exists, and if so, how I can contact him.
All right. How will my friend get word to you in response?
Through you.
Through me? All right. That'll work.
Okay, and she says she'll prepare the scroll work and give it to you tomorrow to take with you when you return to Sigil.
All right.
And immediately from there, she will be leaving here to go to Acheron, where she believes Venvrian Gnolls probably is hiding out. That Gnolls would not be the first Mercy Killer to go rogue and try to lay low in Acheron, which in her opinion is not a very smart thing to do, because that's the first place a Justicar like her would think to look. But she's never known Venvrian Gnolls to be very smart.
Right.
She says this does mean that it will deprive you and your companions of any personal justice that you all felt needed to be meted on Venvrian Gnolls. I would be bringing Gnolls in under lawful colors and turning him over to the Harmonium.
I think my companions and I will be okay with that.
I think Riot owes you one after the whole box fiasco. I think Riot can swallow this one.
Yeah.
I've never known Riot to swallow anything.
Oh my.
There's a couple ways you could take that. We're not going to delve into it. Throughout this conversation, she does not make the offer or give any inclination that she's going to help you with your faded problem at all. She is strictly asking for your assistance with her problem. So the last question here is, do you make any kind of request of her?
Well, I don't know how she'd be able to help.
Okay.
Yeah, well, Kelian will, he'll open up with, I scratch your back, but what about you scratching mine?
And she bristles at that statement as well. Kind of like she hadn't given any thought to the idea that there might be some quid pro quo to this. But she eyeballs your insignia again and kind of seems resigned to it. She says, "Of course, I will hear what you have to ask."
I don't know how you will be able to be of assistance, but I have been enough of a thorn in Darkwood's side that he has felt the need to take my kip from me. All I would ask is if you could think of anything, or do anything, or know of anything that could get me my kip back from underneath him. It would be greatly appreciated.
That if she knows the high-ups of the Faded at all, and she's crossed paths with a few, that whatever Darkwood did would be perfectly legal on the books.
Mm.
And she says, when my factal became reprehensible to me, I climbed the highest mountain in the multiverse seeking answers. Where should you go to seek yours? Make a wisdom check real quick.
Nope.
And yeah, so her answer is very unhelpful to you.
Yeah, 6.
But yeah, she basically, again, to her shame, when her faction became unpalatable to her, she turned her back on it and went seeking answers out into the multiverse and did not find any. And so kind of apologetically, she says she doesn't know where you would look to find these answers.
Yeah, that's... Kelian nods.
She says, on the extremely small chance, though, that your kip was turned into a delightful Isgardian restaurant, I think I would leave well enough alone.
I may well have to, but...
She says I may be able to help another way, though.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, I'm going to have to see to the injustice that's been done to your superior, Torier. When that happens, perhaps he has some insight into your problem that I do not.
Yeah. Well.
But she doesn't give you a timeline on when that might happen. And with that, she excuses herself to go get the paperwork in order. She thanks you for the assistance and bids you good day.
Kelian nods.
So are all 5 of you, plus Amuleth, planning to go to speak to Koranu?
Riot is not going to let Kelian come.
Interesting.
Riot's going to strongly suggest that he stay out of this one.
No, Kelian won't. He is not afraid of Kornu.
Let's put this another way. Riot strongly suggests
Ah!
that Kelian not come.
So does that mean Riot is making a spell fail roll?
Yes.
All right, go ahead and do it.
Yep. Spell goes off. Make that wisdom save.
I know how good you are at wisdom checks.
I rolled the exact same thing.
Nice.
So you passed the suggestion. You passed the save.
No.
No.
I held it.
So Riot strongly suggest. Actually, give me 1 second to make sure that suggestion even works properly on Mount Celestia. I want to double check that.
Yeah. It's not an illusion spell, but oh well, you know what? It's already worked once.
Yeah, you're right. You have. Yeah, it's not causing any deception or anything like that. So yeah, Kelian, she strongly suggests that it would be a bad idea, and considering your interactions with Koranu, that strikes you as a good point.
All right.
All right, so we're going to take about 10 minutes, take a break, go ahead and get your snaglins in order, and then we'll come back and have a nice conversation, which I'm sure will go pleasantly with Koranu. The question is, what does Kelian do during that time?
Yeah, I got to think about that.
Okay. And let's reconvene here at 4:15.
Sounds
Okay.
good.